With the recording, we will be sending it out later in the week, but we do ask that to save bandwidth for all of our attendees and for a clean recording, we ask that you turn off your cameras and mute yourselves during the presentation. I will be monitoring the chat so you can share questions there, and then occasionally Beth will open up the floor for questions, and feel free to take yourselves off mute at that point. Aaron Shields is running tech for us today. Thank you, Aaron. As I said, we're recording. Alice will share it in a follow-up email. If you're uncomfortable with your name showing, you can change your name to anonymous and private message Aaron with your name for attendance. Also, if your Zoom name doesn't match the name you registered with, if you could please change it or let Aaron know. I'm going to go ahead and do our land acknowledgement. Texas Children in Nature Network is headquartered in Austin, and as such, I'm on the ancestral and unceded land of the Tonkawa, Comanche, and Sana people. Our ongoing colonial presence on indigenous lands compels us to take action now to counteract the effects of colonization. The work we do through the Texas Children in Nature Network is one small step towards that effort. In just a moment, I'm going to put a couple of links in the chat about land acknowledgements. And I'm going to go ahead and welcome Beth. Beth Edwards is with Green Space Learning and has worked closely with the OLE Texas initiative out of the Department of State Health Services. So welcome, Beth, and we're happy to have you with us today.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here today. It's always great to work with Sarah and the team here. I am Beth Edwards, and I'm recognizing some faces here. So good to see you all. I work for Green Space Learning out of Fort Worth. Excuse me. I am a trainer. I am an OLE designer. I have been through the design program with North Carolina State. And so that's a little bit about me. How I got connected with OLE was through the design program there. And we work across Texas and putting in natural spaces in nature playgrounds. So that's what we're going to talk about today, the best practices for that. I'm also a trainer. I have been a director. I've been a teacher in early childhood centers. And I'm just delighted to be here and working with all of you today. So I'm going to share my screen here. If you have questions, I will do my best to monitor the chat, or Sarah or Alice will let me know that they're there. And then, periodically I'll stop and we can talk and chat. So please don't hesitate to ask those questions as they come up for you. Okay, so there we go. It was working earlier today, so I assume it's up. Again, OLE Texas, best practices for your natural outdoor spaces. And I am Beth Edwards from Green Space. So our objectives today, we're going to define OLE. What do we mean when we talk about OLE and OLE Texas? We'll review just briefly the benefits of nature and why it is so critical to get our children outside. Everything we can do indoors, we can take outdoors, and it becomes a completely different experience for children. So we want to make sure that we're getting children outside as much as possible. It is so good for the sensory systems and their overall development. Today, the best practices that we're talking about are from 0 all the way to 100, right? These are best practices for everyone, no matter what type of space you're building for children. Okay, we'll talk about the components of an OLE playground and why we put in our different settings and why we have the indicators that we have for our outdoor spaces. I have a couple of slides with the OLE Texas partners listed. Feel free to screenshot any of those and use those resources. And then I have a completely different resource page that has articles and websites and things like that for you to use as well. So that is our agenda for this morning. So I want you to think for a moment, and you feel free to share this in the chat, or you can unmute if you have something that you would like to share. But think about your own experiences of childhood. What are your memories of outdoors?
I remember what I thought was a giant boulder when I was little, but when I see it as an adult, it was probably only 3 or 4 feet tall. But spending hours climbing that and inventing little worlds while I was up there, because in my head, no one could see me while I was on top of that boulder.
Absolutely. And that perception in childhood is amazing, right? Things seem so big. And, it's like you can have this little hill, but you feel like you're king of the mountain. So absolutely.
And then, Beth, we have a few things in the chat. Sarah Walker has being outside from sunup to sundown. Aaron Shields says, I remember making up names for things. Lois Monica has playing in the water, climbing trees. Cynthia wrote, in the rain, playing with soap and making suds. Katie Armstrong has making potions with natural elements. Maribel Rivera playing in puddles. Priscilla Prather, I loved running barefoot. My feet were always black with dirt and so many stickers. I loved drinking from the hose. Haley Pace has riding my bike. And then Sarah Walker, discovering new places in the neighborhood that were new to us as kids.
Yeah. And so much of that is just textural things with the grass and making mud pies and potions and all of that, and it there's that sense of just creating when you're outdoors. So, and running barefoot, right? How did you feel when you were outside? Safe. Suzanne. Yeah. Yeah. The generation when we weren't allowed inside. Free. Look at this whole thing, right? Happy and free. The boundaries were endless. In charge. Right? Yeah. I love all of those. And I've asked this question hundreds of times now, it feels like, and free comes up almost immediately every single time. And when we think about it, our children, we are constantly telling them what they need to do, right? We are on top of them. We're micromanaging them through their day. And that freedom, that being outside, right? It's just a contrast. And when we're, I like to ask that we think about that, when we're working with our children, where can we give them this type of freedom that we felt when we were outside playing, right? And that not feeling supervised, that's part of childhood too, right? That autonomy building, that building of identity, too, in having the freedom to make their own choices, right? And again, we tend to, as teachers or educators, we tend to want to impart knowledge on children, right? However, outdoors, children can create that knowledge. They can create that self-identity, that autonomy, and they can guide their own learning, which is important too. And so thank you. Yeah. So as we go through these PowerPoints and as you go back to your own spaces, think about that sense of freedom, right? And how can you bring children in your care, in your programs, that same sense of freedom, right? Because play is different today. We all know that, isn't it? Right. So let's talk about some of the benefits of nature play, right? All of these things here, right? We have these children climbing in the trees. This is at a Montessori school here in Arlington. And these children have been in their naturescape, since they were toddlers and babies. And so here they are. Vivian here is 4, and she's climbing to the high depths of that tree, right? And this is this is a space here where, she seems like she's so high, right? And she's really just about 4 feet off the ground. But that sense of freedom, that sense of body in space. You know, she's having to learn how to navigate all those different branches. She has learned this over time, right? She has tested those branches and she has learned how to maneuver her way, move her body through that space. And then she has these other children too who are also climbing the tree. So she's having to navigate where they are in space too, right? So, and they're having to watch out for her. So many lessons in that just climbing of a tree and how simple that is, right? So children learn to problem solve, and so much problem solving and climbing that tree. But even in making your mud pies and your potions, you know, you're gathering materials, you're putting it together, you're figuring out what you want to do, you're testing your ideas. If you're playing with water, you're playing with the motion of the water, you're observing sink or float, you're observing the properties of water. So many ways to take in knowledge when we're outside. So problem solving is part of this. Communicating, right? We're communicating with one another, and the outdoors, and particularly in an OLE environment, the opportunities for collaboration and communication are great. You know, children may want to move stumps and create a structure, right? So they get together and they come up with their ideas and they start to communicate and collaborate together. One of my favorite moments of being outside was working with toddlers. And I had a 18-month-old in my group, and he wanted to move a stump. Now our stumps were toddler size, they're 18 inches to maybe 24. And he wanted to move it from one part of the playground to another. And he had been in our program for about 4 months. And instead of coming to me, he went to other friends. And in this body language and in limited communication, they figured out how to move the stump together where they wanted it to be. And here they are, you know, these are tiny kids. And, you know, when they're together and they're living in this social environment outside, and we're stepping back as the adults and observing, you know, they learn to communicate with each other. They learn to collaborate with each other. And the outdoors affords that opportunity in a way that's very unique. They learn to keep themselves safe, right, through risky play. They learn to know what their boundaries are. They learn how their bodies work. Nature, as opposed to standing playground equipment, is always moving, right? So if I'm walking across a stump or I'm walking across a log, it's going to be different every time because the balance is going to shift a little bit, right? I'm going to learn that as I practice that over and over again. And at first I'm going to be really, really careful because it shifts, right? So instinctively, children slow down, they test it, then they walk across it. As they gain their confidence, we can watch them, you know, get better and better at it, right? So children learn to keep themselves safe. Standard playground equipment doesn't change, it doesn't move, right? So once children figure out what it does, then they start looking for other ways to use it, right? So, you know, that's part of risky play, and part of keeping themselves safe is through learning in the environment, how they move in the environment. Taking simple risks, right? They learn to keep themselves safe as well. Managing stress. As soon as we go outside, our dopamine raises and our blood pressure goes down, right? So even just taking a few minutes outside, if you're having a hectic day, can alleviate stress, you know, not just for the children, but for educators as well, right? It's so creative outdoors. You know, it's so many opportunities, like for those mud potions and all of that. There's a lot of opportunity to create and make. If there's loose parts and branches outside, they can create structures, right? There's opportunities for resilience. They try things over and over again, right? These children did not climb that tree the first time. They didn't, you know, they had to test different ways of doing that. Some of those ways didn't work, right? So they had to test other ways. So they learned to try over and over again. Imagination develops outside, navigating relationships, that independence that we all talked about, right? There was no supervision outside, right? We could just be kids. it's relaxing many times. Play is relaxing for children, and play is how they figure out the world. How they figure out who they are in the world, and how they test different ways of being in the world too, which is all part of that identity development. They find the simple joys. These playgrounds do not have to be complicated. We're talking logs, we're talking stumps, we're talking Sarah's boulder, right? These are simple things, right? With so much texture, and it brings so many ways of moving about the space, and moving these objects, and building our fine and gross motor and our sensory systems, and all of those things. Children dream to do it. When you were on top of that boulder, right? You could be anywhere. You could be flying to the moon. You could be, on top of a big ship, whatever it may be. And with all the nature outside, my imagination can create as much as I need to, as much as I want to. So all of these just from being outside.
Beth, we've got a question in the chat from Vanetta.
Yeah.
She asks, with many public schools moving away from physical education, are there any programs or ideas on how to get nature play into those schools?
Yes, and there's one on middle schools too. Advocacy, right? Going back to administration and making the point that our children are actually going to be better learners if we can get them outside. The increase in dopamine makes it so that we can focus better, right? So when we take children outside and have those brain breaks, and we reduce their stress, they're better prepared to go back in and learn. Or even better, if we can take them outside to learn, right? It's a whole new experience. It's a sensory experience. They're going to be in a more heightened state where they can learn even better, right? So advocacy is huge in getting, getting more green spaces in. Some of our school districts are beginning to look at adding nature spaces into. There is a professor with TCU here in Fort Worth, and she does a lot of speaking to school districts and teachers in how to get children outside within the structure of the day without too much changing and shifting of the structure. And it's like 10-15-minute increments through the day. And it's simple things like just getting them outside to take a walk, maybe sitting in the front lawn, reading together, just different ways of getting the children outside. So there's also a Green School Initiative, which is based in Washington, D.C., I believe. And I know Sarah is connected with them and can get some information to us that way. But their goal too is to create green playgrounds across the country, and particularly in areas where there's play deserts, and the community needs that park space, right? It's a way that we can get children into green spaces relatively easily because all neighborhoods have some sort of schools in there. So those are a few ways, but advocacy, we have to push as teachers and help our policymakers, help our leaders to understand that nature matters, right? It is part of learning. It's part of well-being. It's part of social emotional development, right? Getting children outside helps them to be better learners. So Priscilla here says, that we don't let children figure things out. When she teaches development, she teaches the types of play to middle schoolers. They often don't understand all of them because so many of them have been kept, yes, from hurting themselves or navigating different situations. Yes, I mean, it's, allowing children that risky play is part of that resilience building, right? And we take that away sometimes when we're overcautious, and as well intended as protecting our children may be, you can't protect children from life. And when we try to do that, we do them, as Priscilla is saying, it's a disservice. to our kiddos, right? They're not as resilient. Yep. And allowing them to take a drink from the hose. Yep. And something as I've evolved in my practice of play and advocating for play and nature play in particular is this isn't just about young children, right? Our middle schoolers, our upper elementary age, even our high schoolers play, right? Even as adults, we play. It helps us to be more creative. It helps us to be more innovative, right? And creativity and innovations are the skills of the future, right? Our job markets are changing so much. And, today's jobs for kiddos, some of these jobs aren't even invented yet. And if you think about Uber and how long that's just been in existence, maybe 4 years now, if that, it wasn't even a thing before, right? And children are going to need to be innovative. They're going to need to be more creative as we move from the industrial age where it was all about productivity, to being creative thinkers and being a part of the new way of economy, right? So play is a big part of that, is developing that creativity, that innovation, testing of ideas, and all of that kind of thing. So benefits to nature play, and we've discussed that this increases neurotransmitters in the brain, right? And synaptic connections that build the brain. That outdoors is so sensory rich that it helps to lay that brain architecture in our youngest, our babies, our toddlers that are developing their brains. All of this is so good, right, for them. The dopamine, again, is part of our ability to focus. When we raise dopamine, we have the higher more heightened state of alertness, which helps us to focus. It helps us to learn. It also raises serotonin and other hormones that are connecting. So we connect to one another better. We connect to the world through those things. It also counteracts stress hormones like cortisol in being outside. So that's where that part of that stress relieving also helps when we get outside. It promotes healing, right? First thing in COVID, get outside, right? That's what the CDC said, for your mental health, but also your physical health. It boosts the immune system through vitamin D, through all these things that we can get outdoors. And then again, it's so sensory rich outside in a way that we cannot replicate indoors, right? The whole experience of being outside is sensory. We have the wind blowing, we have, the sunlight, we have the heat on our skin from the sun, we can feel the different textures. Even in this pictures, there's, a million different textures that children are feeling. Our indoor spaces tend to be plastic heavy, right? For practical reasons. And I encourage all educators to bring in other textures into your indoor spaces too, to create that sensory environment. But outside is just totally, sensorial, right? From smells to hearing to seeing and all of that. Vision, we can see much further outside than we can indoors. So it helps to develop our vision in a different way, in addition to the sunlight, which helps to develop the eyesight as well. Yeah, middle schoolers, getting them outside, Kate, and letting them be together, right? That's what middle schoolers want to do. They want to be together. They want to socialize together. And unfortunately, it's hard for some of our middle schools because they don't have that opportunity. But taking loose parts outside, even our middle schoolers can do loose parts, gardening, all of that kind of thing can be done outdoors. Taking experiments outside, letting them make mud puddles in their own way, with different, you might take flour and water and that kind of stuff outside, add it to loose parts that are outside, and let them create sculptures and things like that, turn it into an art project, that kind of thing, to help them play. Talk about play with them and why it's important and that it's good for them. And the more they learn to play, right, the more they will do it for themselves, right? This age group likes to connect with one another. So even games like charades and taking that kind of thing outside. That's all very playful, and encouraging them to take the lead in that. Asking children, what do you want to do in play? And talking to them about that, to bringing them into the spaces. And we'll talk about that further as we move through this presentation today. But you can gather a lot of information from the kiddos about their spaces and how they want to be in those spaces. And we don't often listen to their voices. So OLE stands for the Outdoor Learning Environment. And, for me, when I think about OLE, it goes back to Richard Louv, who in the late 90s started to notice and through his work, coined the term nature deficit disorder. Through his research, he recognized that children were spending less than 2 minutes a day. And this, mind you, is in the late 90s. In unstructured play. Children were outside, but it was structured. It was being led by adults. Children were not just free flowing outdoors. It was about 2 minutes a day in unstructured play. And that, that's startling, that kids are that far removed as a whole from nature, right? How do you know how the world works if you haven't experienced nature, if you haven't experienced a seed growing? How do you develop empathy then? How do you see, what's amazing about science and biology and amazing about our world if you don't experience it, right? So you kind of set this foundation, this movement of getting children outdoors. And I do believe since COVID, we certainly see more people talking about getting outdoors. We see centers wanting more and more training about being outdoors with children, how to do that, what that looks like. And we have gotten more and more inquiries about nature spaces from schools all across Texas as well. So my hope is that we're starting to turn that tide a bit and starting to make some headway with people understanding that we do need to be outside. All of us need to be outside, right? NLI, which is with North Carolina State University, was founded in 2000. And this was with the idea of promoting the importance of the natural environment and daily experiences, getting outside for children through environmental design, through outdoor learning spaces. Right, and that includes outdoor learning classrooms, right? So a lot of research and things like that is being done through NLI, and I have the link to them. NLI is where I became a designer. They have courses that you can take in designing a natural play space if you're a teacher or if you are a designer. So they have 2 different tracks that you can go and learn about natural outdoor spaces. So if you are a consultant in early childhood or have some leadership influence, I recommend taking that educator course and learning in depth about all of these things. So OLE Texas is a partner with NLI to train educators and designers using this framework that we're going to talk about today for those outdoor spaces. In the chat here real quick because I noticed some activity there. Good. I'm glad you all are sharing those resources. That's what this is about, is learning from each other. Okay, so here we are. We have 12 best practices for outdoor spaces. Oops, sorry about that. So here we go. We have 10 or more learning settings, and we're going to go through each one of these individually here in a minute. We talk about looping and curvy primary pathways to get us through these spaces. Grassy areas includes shade structures, a lot of loose part material that children can play with and explore, and we'll talk about that and what that looks like and some ideas for those natural loose parts. Obviously, children need equipment to play with out there, so we do want to take buckets and all that stuff outside. Gross motor activities must be supported by the outdoor learning environment. That is a requirement to be true OLE. There are formulas to calculate the amount of trees that you need on the space under the framework for OLE. Edible fruit trees, shrubs, and plants. These OLE spaces are meant to be heavily landscaped so that children can interact with plants, not just for the health benefits, for children to learn how to, where our food comes from, that kind of thing. And have that experience with vegetable gardens and fruit trees. And then outdoor classroom is another element to OLE. And then storage space, right? Which as teachers, we're always about that storage space, aren't we? So we're going to start with the looping pathways here, or actually, I'm sorry, 10 or more settings, right? And settings are distinct areas within the playground design where children can go for different activity, right? They afford children all the different ways of moving outside, of being creative outside, of being innovative for social emotional development, all the things that children are doing as they move through the space. The purpose is to offer children choices outside, right? They can be anywhere they want to be on these playgrounds. They're open-ended, so children can use the materials in any way that they want to. They can play through the space however they feel like they need to, right? Examples of settings are sand and water areas, which this particular layout has 19 different areas. So we've gone way above the 10 in this design here. Up here in the corner, number 13 is a gross motor area. There's logs, there's stumps, there's boulders for children to climb over and move about that space. Next to it here in the middle of this space, these X's are tree trunks. There was a giant willow tree. So there was a lot of shade in that area, and there was actually the willows, they have the long branches that go down. The children can actually swing on them, right? So the willow tree itself becomes something that the children can interact with. Next to it here, we put in a water space. This particular playground is right off the Trinity River in Fort Worth. So the view from the backside here is of the Trinity River and the trail that they're lucky enough that the trail is going by. So there's a lot of nature, not just on this playground, but surrounding it too. So we took advantage of that. There was a natural slope, so there's some drainage that heads out that way. So we put in the water feature here, and then we put in sand and also a gravel pit in this area. So the children had sand to play with, they had the gravel to play with, they had water, all in this section here where they can take one bit to the other and use the water with the gravel with the sand and just create and make those mud pies and those potions and all of those things. So that as an example, that right here we have 3 different areas for children to play in. So 3 different settings in this little space here. This was existing playground equipment that we're not opposed to standing playground equipment, the traditional things. They afford children opportunities to climb, often have slides and things like that. So we will incorporate good playground equipment into our designs. Around here, there was a track around the space for bikes and wheeled vehicles. There was another climbing zone here. There happened to be a memorial to an individual who donated money to this particular center. So that was right here. So we landscaped it and made it a place for children to interact and play within that space. Over here, we have art down in the lower corner, 5 and 6. That was actually, I'm wrong about that. That was a play hut in this whole kind of fairy garden feel to it. So a lot of plantings in there, a lot of little pathways, places for the children to hide and play. And then some stumps and some boulders for them to hop around as they're playing in their imaginary world there. Number 4 next to it, and number 3 is a garden area. There was a water source there, so that, you know, lends itself for the location of the garden area. And so that's a big space for them where they grow a lot of different things. As we come around this side, there's some tables here. There's an easel here. So this is kind of your outdoor classroom space all along here, 4, 3, 2. All of that would be considered the classroom space. There's tables, there was storage in that area. There was easels, so places to bring work outside, places for children to create outside. Number 8 here is a gathering space. If you wanted to do some reading from this center, they could come here. They can all sit together and do reading or whatever activities. Maybe they have a group meeting or things like that can be done in that section there. This 21 here is a hill that we put in. It's a low hill. It's about 3.5, 4 feet high. Pretty good size though, so children can have that experience of running up and running down. There was a slight slope to this space, however, it was very flat. So we just added in some terrain there for them to, for children to experience that, roll down the hills and all that proprioceptive stimulation that they need to develop their senses. And at the top, there's a little bridge. So this also, when they were at the top of it, it was kind of like a platform. And you could see into the Trinity River there for them. Again, we have some more garden beds here at number 16, and we kind of just put that garden all along the fence line there. This entry, number 19 here, is this kind of welcoming path, which is part of OLE 2, that we have this definitive entrance to the playground. Sometimes it's arbors with vines on it, but just this welcoming thing that says, hey, this is our space. There might be a little, you know, tunnel, boulders, things like that, just to welcome children into the space. Or families or however, teachers, right? We like to be out there too. There's adult seating in this space too. We see the outdoor spaces is not just for the children, but it's also, you know, hopefully a relaxing and soothing place for adults and that are working with the children too, right? A place where maybe you can take a break for a few minutes and just relax and feel, you know, rejuvenated in that time. But even while you're out with the children on the playground, you know, interacting with them and just having this space that is just lovely for everybody is kind of that goal of the OLE. Okay. I covered everything in this one. I got, yep. So we talked about the entrance area there, and then the gathering space is part of OLE too. When we talk about setterings, the gathering space is one of those 10. And then again, that's just for everybody to go out and meet outside and have that place to read and do activities together. So the looping pathway, and this is probably one of the most challenging things with an outdoor play space from our perspective as designers. It's expensive. It's expensive to put in very wide pathways, particularly through center playgrounds. And the space at centers doesn't always allow for a big pathway to meander through it. So while this is very much an OLE requirement and the reasoning is legitimate, right? Research indicates that pathways afford higher levels of physical activity. When a child sees a pathway, they tend to run, right? They tend to go right down that pathway. We all do. We follow the path. We want to see where it goes. And then, you know, so people are more likely to walk through the space when we have this connecting pathway. And the idea is for that pathway to connect all of the spaces within the playground, right? It helps to distribute activity throughout the space. So as children are following the space, some of them are going to follow it to the end, and maybe you have the rock box down there. Somebody else is going to take it the other direction, maybe over by your dramatic play area. So it just naturally kind of moves people about your space in a way that distributes the activity throughout the space. So those are the purposes of a looping curvy pathway. However, it's not always cost effective for centers, and it can eat a large part of their budget because it tends to be concrete work, flat work, and that requires engineering and that kind of thing to get it through the space. However, what we do is kind of a compromise there is we'll make these smaller pathways, and you can kind of see one here where we have stepping stones, and then we have DG going through the space. So, our philosophy with green space is that we want nature on the playgrounds, right? And we follow as much of the OLE standards as we can. However, we have to be realistic about budgets and what a center can do. So while we can do the full gamut of an OLE space, and a lot of agencies and things like that want that, for our centers, though, we can work within those guidelines and stuff. So if you're setting up your own space, use these guidelines and do as much as you can. However, do your best just to get nature on your playground, right? That's the overarching goal, is let's get children out there. Let's get them exploring materials. Let's get them into nature spaces. Let's create this for our community, right? So that's kind of, this is one of the big, like I said, one of the bigger stumbling blocks for centers is trying to get a pathway through. So we do these like little sections of pathways that kind of start children off running down, and then children will create their own pathways through the space too. We see this on trails a lot where people have kind of cut through and created their own trails, right? So that's kind of the idea as well too. So these are guidelines. Grassy areas, OLE likes to see a big space where children can just run, open space for group games, maybe running, all that big rough and tumble play. And they like to see it be able to accommodate 25 or more for gatherings. And again, that's, for large group games, large group gatherings, and that kind of thing. So, but even just having a piece of your playground that remains just field or grassy for your balls and for your running around and even just lounging like she's doing this picture here. Yeah, there's questions about DG. Yes. We use a lot of DG. DG is good because it solidifies with water. And so it does stay in an area. We prep it with, we kind of carve out where we want to put it, maybe a half-inch depth or so. And then we lay the grass barrier down, and then we put the DG on top of that. And then the trick is to really pack it and then wet it. Through time, rain, that kind of thing, it really almost becomes like a cement piece. It is not easy always for bikes to get across. However, it's better than just trying to get a bike through the grass, right? So DG, we tend to use a lot of that in our spaces. Okay, shade, right? Particularly here in Texas, shade is a thing, right? So part of the trees that we put in on OLE spaces, we put that in mind that in time we're going to grow this canopy, right? So that's part of the planning with OLE. And when we look at our spaces and where to put the trees in, is how can we create this canopy over the playground space in time, right? Shade structures such as shade sails, what we tend to use are smaller shade sails over on wood poles that we cement into the ground to get it over a space. So kind of this little canopy that we do. And of course, you can do anything. We see those massive shade sails that are, tens of thousands of dollars too. So looking for shade structures that are relatively economical, the smaller ones that you can get off of Amazon now, cemented into the ground over your space, allows for some shade. And then the trees, we keep trees on properties as much as possible. We very rarely request that a tree be removed. So working with trees that we have, and then we also add in trees to, again, build that canopy, right? And shade, for obvious reasons, it actually allows us to get outside longer than if it was in the heat of the sun, and then protects the children from the sun too. So what do we mean when we talk about loose materials being outside, being in our play spaces? Loose material is material that children can manipulate in open-ended ways. We often call it loose parts, right? And these are some examples of loose parts. Of course, loose parts can be a collection of anything. Loose parts allow children to put parts together, take things apart, move things about in just endless possibilities. So even a collection of buttons and seashells together can be loose parts, right? So collections of items create loose parts. So for nature, it can be leaves, it can be pine needles, it can be sticks, it can be stones, it can be seeds, it can be flowers and the pieces of the flowers. If you have a sensory table, put flowers in that sensory table with tweezers and magnifying glasses and tongs, and let the children deconstruct those flowers, right? Let them learn what the seeds look like. Where are they within the context of the flower? What do the petals look like, right? Even pulling roots. And, a lot of pre-K teachers are like, oh, we like our gardens, but the children, they're going to pull them out. Well, yeah, they are. That's part of the learning process too, right? They pull them out. We can say, oh gosh, you found the root. Oh gosh, when we pull it out, the plant can't survive, right? Let's plant it back in, right? So we recommend having lots and lots of plants out there so that when things do get pulled, it's okay. We have more, we can put it back in, we can take that plant, we can put it in a sensory table and explore it and use it as a topic of observation or even inquiry, right? So use flowers. My favorite thing to do is grow the big sunflowers on the playground. And then in like August, September, it starts to dry out and you've got the sunflower with all the seeds in it. Put that in your sensory table with tweezers and tongs and, even an ear of dried corn, and let them pull those things apart. Right. It's great for their fine motor, and they're drawn to that activity. So use seeds. Seeds are one of my favorite things out there. Tree cookies. Tree cookies are slices of branches, like almost like you slice it like cookie dough. So they can be different thicknesses. They can be small. They can be big. They can be, the tree trunks. We cut those down into tree cookie sizes when we do work. So, save your branches, right? We tend to, after a storm, we go through the playground and we remove those branches, don't we? They're dangerous. Well, they're not. They can be if we misuse them, but anything can be, right? So we take them and we put them in our loose parts area where children build and construct with them. So you're seeing that here in this picture. We have cobbles, which are those rocks that they're bigger than a river rock. We use those too. And then the cobbles are they're about this size, great for heavy work, right? Heavy lifting is great for the sensory system. It's great for the nervous system, helps to develop those things. Children with concerns, that heavy work can be very helpful. For underdeveloped sensory systems or too much stimulation going in, that grounding feeling from heavy work can really help a child know where they are in space and feel grounded. So if you're a child with, not without body awareness or underdeveloped proprioceptive systems, you can tend to feel like you're floating in space, right? These children tend to be clumsy. They tend to bump into things because their bodies just aren't developed the way that they need to be. And so this heavy work can help with that. It can help them feel grounded in space. It can help calm the nervous system. So outdoors is the best place for that type of heavy work. And as children are moving branches and there's moving from place to place, their bodies, their gross motor systems, their fine motor systems, their sensory systems are all activated and working together, which, that's what we want for our children, right? That's how we develop properly. So mulch, sand are other forms of loose materials out on playgrounds, pea gravel, so just anything that could be a collection of things, right? When you made your potions when you were kids, you pulled up the clovers from the grass, right? You pulled up little bits of mud. You maybe put some rock in there and water and stirred it all together, right? Those are those creations that we make when we're outside, and loose parts are needed to do all that work. Okay, so this one here is wheeled toys and play equipment and the standard things that we think about on playgrounds, right? Even in a nature space, we want bubbles out there, we want chalk, we want all those things. So that's the type of equipment that we want to put out on our playgrounds. If we have a sandbox, you need props with that. You need containers to put that sand in. You need shovels and buckets and measuring cups, put real tools out on your playground, put real measuring cups out there so children learn cup and half cup, and 2 of these fit into here just through their experimenting and playing. They'll start to play with volume and they'll begin to understand that, right? And we can't really understand volume if we've not filled up a container with sand or water or whatever it may be, right? This is why toddlers fill things and dump it all the time. So we want to put real materials out on our playgrounds for the children to explore and to use. So that's the explanation for putting materials out on the spaces. They do need props. If you have a play hut, they're going to need pots and plants and things to do in that play hut. Scarves are wonderful, open-ended material to put outside. You can put it in if you have a loose parts area like we saw on the other side. Children will build structure and then they'll envelop it with the scarf or with fabric, and it just adds another layer to their play, right? They may need to have a cape when they're playing in the fairy garden, right? That we saw in that one playground. They may need it to cover a stump because they're going to have a picnic, right? So lots of fabric, lots of props, small pots and pans. If you have a mud kitchen area, pots and pans, even in your sand and water areas, right? So think about how the children are going to use the space and what kinds of supplemental materials might they need to fully be able to use that space. Tools for gardening, right? Gross motor is obviously a big component of an outdoor learning environment for all of these reasons, just to build the large muscle groups. Again, the sensory systems are all active when children are climbing and running and doing heavy work and that kind of thing. I often talk about Angela Hanscom's work. Angela Hanscom is a occupational therapist in the Northeast, and she was asked to observe her friend's classroom a few years back, and her friend just let her know that children were doing some movements and she didn't quite understand them. And Angela went in and recognized that a lot of the children were fidgeting. They were falling out of their seats. They were getting up and down a lot. And as she explored this further, what she came to the conclusion is that some of these children had underdeveloped proprioceptive systems, which our proprioceptive system is messages that are sent to our brain from our joints and our muscles in our body. It's part of our vestibular system. They work together to let us know how we're moving in space and how we are, the pressure that we need to sit upright in our chair, pressure that we need to engage core muscles. All of that is part of the proprioceptive system. And in an undeveloped proprioceptive system, children tend to be clumsy. We tend to bump into things. We don't always have that ability to gauge where we are in space or how we're moving through space because we're not being sent the proper sensory input, right? And so we have a phenomenon where children in 5th grade are falling out of seats, right? Because of an underdeveloped proprioceptive system, right? And occupational therapy helps with that. And we have seen over the years a rise in the need for occupational therapy. And that, you know, one of the treatments is to put a child in a swing and spin them, because that puts in the proper sensory input to get the vestibular system and the proprioceptive systems working and active. So, you know, we don't know why, but there are definitely correlations with how often children play and the rise of sensory problems. You know, so play is the antidote. We need to get children outside. We need to get children doing these big motions. We move differently outside than we do indoors, right? We can climb bigger. We can have bigger body movements. We can do heavier work. You know, so much more can be done with our bodies outside. Children naturally run from place to place outside, which is that high intensity interval workout, right? Which is bursts of activity with rest periods. You know, if you go to a gym and you do a high intensity workout, that's what it is. Children naturally do that when they play. They'll be playing, they'll stop, they'll think of something, they'll run over and get it, right? So they'll have this high intense activity for a moment. Then they'll do what they were doing, get back into their play. They may stop for a while and then they may run somewhere else. They may climb on top of these stumps and that boulder to get to where they're going somewhere else, right? Which is again, that high intensity, those brief periods of movement, which is so good for the body, right? So all of these, you know, the outdoors affords all of this type of movement in a unique way, in an ideal way for body development. Okay, I'm going to check the chat here if anybody has any questions. Yes, yeah, it's Balanced and Barefoot. I recommend that book for all teachers, for all parents, for anyone who's working with children, and just to even understand your own body better, and how the sensory systems work. It's a very comprehensive book that she's done, and she was with. She was the keynote for the keynote speaker for TCIN and Summit, 2 years ago, and just a delightful person as well. So, but yes, I highly recommend you research her work and look into how she runs outdoor occupational therapy programs, and so it's fascinating to follow her work. Fruit trees, back to OLE here. Fruit trees are an important part of the OLE framework, as well as shrubs and plants, and vegetable garden is recommended in OLE environments as well. And for all the obvious reasons, we want children interacting with how seeds grow and nurturing and caring for plants, right? That, you know, there's some empathy development there when we care for things. That translates into caring for each other and caring for our environment, right? Also, just the fine motor activity that happens with gardening as we use our hands, being in the dirt and the soil, there's microbes and things that are actually very good for us. It can reduce stress. It can even help alleviate symptoms of depression and anxiety by working with your hands in the dirt. So that's a critical piece to OLE. There are formulas, as you know, if you get into that and you're a designer, we had used specific calculations for the size of the space that tells us how many trees to put into a space, as well as shrubs and plants and vegetable gardens. You know, so if you are someone who wants a whole OLE thing, those formulas are out there. However, do what you can, right? Do what your budget allows, and don't be afraid to put, I think a lot of people are afraid to put landscaping on their property because, you know, children are going to trample on it and that kind of thing. However, there are plant listings of very durable plants that children can that do well with being in spaces where children are playing. The trick for us is we buy good sized plants to begin with. So, go to a wholesaler where you can get, a sizable plant to put in the ground to begin with, which helps a lot with shrubs. Also helps to get it started a little bit faster too, right? So we're not having these, tiny little 1 gallons out there. We've got, 3, 5, 6 gallon plants out there getting started. So that's something you can do to help with that. And let's see, with vegetable gardens more, you can put so much into a small space. It's kind of amazing. And just grow all the things, right? Test it out. There are 2 growing seasons in Texas. We have, about a few more weeks here, we'll be able to start lettuce and cold weather crop, even in the middle, about the mid-March, and it'll grow, through June. And then your second growing season starts like end of August into the fall months, right? So July, you're going to grow rosemary, you're going to grow things that are happy in the heat. But your spring and your fall are the best times, for a lot of our lettuces and that kind of thing. Herbs do pretty well all through the summer. Tomatoes, the trick is starting those early in the spring so that they're done by July. So you take into consideration too that you may have some frost when you start early in the spring. So have a plan for how you're going to cover those fruits and vegetables and keep them. Let's see, some tips for maintaining a vegetable garden at your campus is to put together teams of teachers who are passionate about gardening. And task them with being able to take care of the garden and to keep it going, because it does take a team of people to constantly be working on the gardening, to keep it going, to keep it engaging for everyone's use. So put together that team, put together a playground team that is passionate about outdoors and to maintain the space as well. So that might be a group of volunteer parents. I know when my son was in elementary school, I volunteered to be the outdoor garden person. There was a name for that. And so I went once a week and worked in the garden and took children out to the garden and educated them out there and let them do the thing. So there's systems that we have to think through when we have an outdoor learning space to maintain it and to use it to its full capacity. And so back to fruit trees are great. Really educate yourself on fruit trees. Sometimes you need a male female to produce fruit and that kind of thing. So be aware of that. There, I believe TCINN has a plant list or a link to one. Some of the resources today have links out to plants that are great for playground spaces. Trees also provide, obviously, the shade. Plants provide that shade. Children like to crawl into things. So, setting up a hedge within your playground gives children places to be and to hide among the trees. So plant hedges with a little bit of space in between plants so that there is that cozy little nook area for children to get into. Children love a fairy garden. It's a great place to put pollinators that attract all the butterflies and bees and all that stuff. Bees are good. Bees are our friends. We want to watch for wasps and that kind of thing. But bees, we want to keep the bees going, right? That's how we grow vegetables and that kind of thing. And that's a very critical part of our ecosystem too, right? Which is another reason for getting children into gardens, and so that they learn the different ecosystems and attracting the wildlife to our spaces. So. And then a part of OLE too is health and nutrition, and growing gardens, helps children to understand where our food comes from. and what healthy food is, and how we grow it, and that kind of thing. So some tips to get you started. I'm going to check the chat here. Yeah, Sarah was on it with the friendly plant list. Yeah, good, excellent. Yeah, there are so many people. Let's see. Stay here. Yeah, one of you said that you talked to an arborist. Yeah, I mean, that's a great place to get logs and stumps are from arborists. Companies that trim the trees and that kind of thing, they too will offer, help you locate logs and stumps that we sometimes find them in neighbors' yards and pick them up and that kind of thing. But there's a lot of resources out there. Talk to garden centers, talk to arborists. They do want to partner and offer services and materials to you too. So that's a great way to network and connect with others, like-minded people. So some tips to get started in your outdoor space is observe the children to see how they are using the space, right? I mentioned earlier that we don't often invite children into the conversations when we create environments. It's a piece that we tend to miss. And it's something that is becoming more and more of a topic in the US is how do we include children, not just in our outdoor spaces, but in our indoor spaces, and how do we hear their voices even when we create curriculum, right? We're developing this for children. We need to understand their perspective and their perceptions of how they're receiving our work in our spaces. So observe the children. I was recently on a playground consult, and the director said they had the sandbox in kind of the middle of their playground. And the director said, I don't know why, but the children are taking buckets of sand out of the sandbox, and they were moving it to a location that was clear across the playground under a tree. And she said, I've tried to stop them from doing this. And I'm like, well, you can't stop them. They're telling you actually where they want the sandbox. So, and it was a refresh. And so I said, let's just move that sandbox over here, because that's where the children want to take it. And it made sense that the main sandbox was actually there was no shade above it. It was in a very sunny location, and the children were actually moving it to where a tree was. So they wanted to be able to play with the sand around the tree, have the shade. And so they were just took it into their own hands, and that's what they ran with it. We find children like to dig in certain areas, and that's where we'll put in a rock pot or a rock pit, or maybe that's where we put the mud kitchen because they're already working in that area to dig up the dirt and the mud. So really observe what your children are doing on the playgrounds, and that will tell you where spaces need to be, and also what type of props you're going to need on your playground too, right? So follow the lead of the child, right? Montessori. Ask the children what they think, particularly our older children. Involve them in the process if you're wanting to revamp your playground or add nature spaces to it. Involve the children in the process. What would you like to do outside, right? What do you enjoy doing when you're outside? How do you feel when you're outside? What do you wish was outside? Ask the children. Think of your environments, whether it's indoors or outdoors, as the third teacher, right? You parents are children's first teacher. You as educators, other children, other adults, individuals that they come across are also teaching children, right? And the third is the space, it's the environment itself. So ask yourself, how is my environment supporting curriculum? How is my environment supporting children's development? How is my environment being used to its best ability? Am I intentionally using this space, right? We often forget about our outdoor space. It tends to be the break, but it's a huge part of learning. Sorry about that. So think about it in that perspective. Create a plan. You don't have to be an artist but sketch out the different areas, sketch out the notes as you're watching children play. Oh, this circle here, sandbox. It can be that simple, but come up with a plan so that you have something to follow, and can be intentional and look at and revise. And you may find that you can create this whole plan and then take pieces of it and start to build your playground and, kind of phase or as you get funding or as you get extra dollars here and there, you can add nature to your space that's already, going in existence. Keep what you have there. If playground equipment's in good shape, build around it, right? Incorporate it all into the space. Be aware of a budget, have a budget in mind, and an installation plan. What area do you want to work on? What is a priority? And then prioritize your plan, so that as you get budget dollars, you can add to your space. So outdoor spaces and, even indoor spaces, they're meant to evolve, they're meant to grow over time. And they will change and evolve as the children use the space, as the play becomes more elaborate and changes, and they script different things. Your playground space is going to move with that. Use volunteer labor to help you, find those passionate people, build you can even build a PLC around your outdoor learning space, right? Professional learning community that's all about the nature space and how to use it and curriculum surrounding it if you're in a school district or even in our centers. Keep it simple, right? Children are not asking us for complicated things. They're asking for sticks and boulders and logs and stumps. So it doesn't have to be overly complicated. Just keep it simple. Children are happy with branches, right? There's a million things they can do with a pile of branches in a loose parts area. Structures, seek out advice and professional help as needed. And structures is one area. Don't build a play hut. Don't build any type of climbing equipment. Even, putting logs together, they're flat on the ground, they'll be fine. But if you're trying to attach them in any specific way, seek out the advice of a carpenter, of designers, of people who know what the safety requirements are, right? So I do want to throw that out there. Be aware of licensing guidelines if you are a licensed center. We put in nature spaces all over the place and we have not had any trouble with licensing. But we still have to follow all of those licensing guidelines, watch out for entanglement, entrapment, hazards, things like that. So work with your rep too, and if you're doing a big overhaul, not just putting out a few logs or building a garden box, but if you're doing a big overhaul, work with your rep to make sure that it aligns with licensing if you're a licensed center. So those are just some tips to get started there. Have fun with it. Master gardeners are another resource to reach out to master gardeners for their expertise to help you build a garden space. This here is just children at play, right? It's what we do. And so these are just different ways from our centers at Green Space. We do have a large boulder climbing boulder that the children are jumping off of all the time. They jump into a fall zone there. That rock is over 4 feet, over the two foot limit. So they do have a full fall zone and use zone surrounding that. This little, these two in the bottom corner here, painting logs and stuff. I encourage you to take paint outside, art materials outside. Anything you can do inside, you can do outside. So take all those things with you and allow the children to experiment and explore and take it all outside. Same with the mud kitchen, a lot of creation there, you can see the materials that we add to that space. And they definitely use that space, right? It is dirty. We hose it off at the end of the day. And some tips for maintaining your space is you do want to restore the environment periodically, put the branches back in the loose parts area, take the cobbles, group them back together, and move, constantly be restoring the materials, keep it well organized so children can find what they need. Have a storage unit outside where everything's organized so you can find it easily, so the materials last longer. We restore at the end of the day, and then we also set up provocations or invitations to play, where we'll set out the tools and the materials in an attractive way for the children to come and use in the space. So art materials we take outside, we take books, literacy, we have clipboards with pens and paper, pencils, all the writing utensils. That's all outdoors for the kiddos. A good way to transport materials outside is just to have tote bags. So maybe you have a tote bag with art materials and you take that with you to the playground one day. It can be as simple as that. Maybe you have a tote bag with library books in it for reading outside. Maybe you have some games that you take outside, chalk and bubbles and that kind of thing, and another tote bag that you take outside. So that can be a great just classroom materials that you take with you and store back in your classroom too. So a lot of centers have, a lot of different parameters and they're sharing spaces. So, come up with systems that work best for your area and your programs, whatever that may be. Okay. So these are some resources here. We have NLI at North Carolina State, and this is linked to a lot of information there about OLE, natural learning environments and designing environments. There are courses that you can take there. There's that educator design course, and then also one for designers as well. Both of those are listed there. So a lot of information on how to build and design. The Brit here in Fort Worth is a great resource. They're an OLE partner. Of course, Texas Children and Nature Network, our favorite, right? So they have a lot of, Sarah has a lot of information out there on their webpage. Butterfly Heroes, everything you need to know about butterfly gardening. If you've not read Richard Lou's books, he also has a website. He actually is founder of Children and Nature Network, of which Texas Children Nature Network is an affiliate. So a lot of information on his website. I recommend reading the book, and he's got several more out there too. And then the Department of Health Services right now holds the OLE. This is their website page, which tells you more about the OLE initiative, which is much broader than just playgrounds. It involves obesity prevention and nutrition and a whole array of things. So familiarize yourself with that. And there's resources there and partners listed there as well. So some great resources. Feel free to take a picture or, screenshot this one. And then I think, okay, that was my last slide there. If you have any questions, any observations, anything that you would like to share out loud or in the chat, I would love to hear from you. So yeah, a lot of resources in the chat. So tell me what your takeaways from today are. What would you like to start in your program? What would you like to learn more about?
And folks, feel free to take yourselves off mute if you'd like.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and stop the sharing so I can see you all.
For me, it's always going to be about how I can incorporate middle schoolers into our garden. I know that this is mainly for younger children and it's the place you want to start. But I see this deprivation from our middle schoolers that just want to go outside and play. And it's so hard with all the other stuff that we have required for them.
Yeah. And we take a lot away from our middle schoolers. And it is so important for them to keep playing and have these opportunities to be outdoors and interacting with one another. And I think gardening is a great project for them, right? And project work for middle schoolers is great.
I have an in-home preschool, so backyard space is limited. So I was just curious, what out of the best practices that are listed, what would be some of the most, I guess, top recommendations you would make for a small space like that?
Okay. Container gardening, right? You can do that in a relatively small space, even just a big barrel that you can put herbs in, that's gardening. So whatever space you have out there, what kinds of containers can you put out there for gardening?